money. Money. Money.
Money. Why?
Give me.
Why?
Most people who came across Itchy Boots saw a woman riding a motorcycle across borders most travelers would never dare to cross, calmly filming her journeys with quiet confidence and little interest in dramatizing the hard moments. What many never knew, however, is the story behind it all. Before the 2.8 million subscribers, before the viral rides across Asia, Africa, and South America, she was going through a private breakdown in the Netherlands. Her life was unraveling behind closed doors, and the future she believed was secure suddenly collapsed. The life that looked complete from the outside. Back in 2018, Noraly Schoenmaker had the kind of life that appears stable from a distance and requires no explanation. Schoenmaker worked as a geologist in the Netherlands, a profession built on careful observation, scientific methodology, and years of formal training. The career was established, the income was reliable, the home was owned, the relationship appeared secure. Every piece of the conventional checklist sat in its proper column, ticked and accounted for. How does a life that looks complete from the outside fall apart so suddenly? The answer, in this case, was betrayal. Schoenmaker discovered that the partner sharing the home had been involved in a long-term affair. That discovery landed not just as the end of a romantic relationship, but as the collapse of the entire structure that had been built around it. The home, the daily routine, the sense of shared future, and the basic trust that makes ordinary life feel safe all came down at once. What makes the story of that moment significant is not the betrayal itself, which is painful but common, but the decision that followed it. Many people in that position try to repair what remains. They stay in the city. They keep the job. They rebuild around the familiar because the familiar is at least known. Schoenmaker moved in a different direction entirely. The career was left behind. The house was sold. Almost every possession was released. With no job, no home, and no relationship holding anything in place, Schoenmaker purchased a one-way ticket to India. Observers who have studied Schoenmaker's journey have noted that this decision was not framed as an adventure or a bold statement. It was framed as survival. The emotional weight of discovering a long-term betrayal inside a home creates a specific kind of psychological urgency. Returning to the same streets, the same routines, and the same geography that carry the memory of the person who violated trust can make healing feel structurally impossible. Leaving was not an escape in the avoidance sense. Leaving was the removal of every daily reminder that would otherwise make it impossible to move forward. That distinction matters when understanding why the decision felt necessary rather than impulsive. The life that Schoenmaker had spent years constructing carefully was gone in a matter of weeks. At 28 years old, with a one-way ticket and a backpack, the next chapter had no visible shape. What no one could have predicted, including Schoenmaker, was what that shapelessness would eventually produce. India was the destination, but it nearly became the end of the plan entirely. India and the plan that fell apart. The original idea was practical and hopeful in the way that ideas born from necessity often are. Schoenmaker planned to travel through India while sustaining the journey financially through travel blogging and writing. The plan had logic to it. Schoenmaker was educated, observant, and had stories worth telling. The internet was full of travel writers who had built careers from exactly this kind of footloose, document-everything approach to seeing the world. The plan failed quickly. Stories did not sell at the pace needed to cover basic costs. Money began running low in ways that moved past uncomfortable and toward genuinely threatening. Cold nights, hunger, loneliness, and real fear became the texture of daily life in a way that no travel brochure and no YouTube video from that era had prepared anyone for. How does someone who has already lost everything at home navigate the discovery that the escape plan is also failing? The answer, for Schoenmaker, proved to be a shift in psychological focus that became, in retrospect, the most important transformation of the entire journey. When survival becomes the daily priority, the mind stops replaying the past. The specific emotional dynamic that makes betrayal so consuming, the constant revisiting of what happened, and when and why, and whether it could have been prevented, gets interrupted by the immediate pressure of finding food, warmth, and safety. Observers who work in trauma recovery have noted this pattern across many contexts. When the body is occupied with immediate physical needs, the emotional narrative that runs on repeat inside grief and betrayal loses some of its grip. The mind cannot simultaneously catastrophize about the past and plan the next practical step. Schoenmaker later reflected that the difficult early months in India were, in a strange way, useful. The suffering was real. The fear was real. But the shift in focus from emotional pain to practical problem-solving created a foundation that the journey would stand on for years afterwards. The hardship also clarified something essential about Schoenmaker's own resilience. A person who had spent years inside a secure professional career in geology, working systematically with complex data and difficult field conditions, discovered in those hungry months in India that the capacity for endurance under pressure had not diminished from being untested. It had simply been waiting for a context that required it. The hardship also clarified something. Schoenmaker had arrived in India with a plan that depended on the internet paying for the journey. That plan was not working. The question was whether a different kind of plan existed. The 3-week rental changed everything, and the change was not subtle. The motorcycle that changed everything. The Royal Enfield Himalayan that Schoenmaker rented for 3 weeks in India was not an unfamiliar type of machine. Back in the Netherlands, a Ducati Monster 796 had already occupied a specific place in Schoenmaker's life, described with the kind of clear affection that riders use when talking about the machines that first made them understand what riding actually feels like. The love for motorcycles existed before India, but what India did was turn a love into a direction. Riding the Himalayan through Indian roads and passes produced a quality of experience that Schoenmaker described in terms that went beyond pleasure or excitement. Behind the handlebars, with the demands of the road requiring complete attention and the landscape offering constant new information, there was no past relationship to replay. There was no lost career to grieve. There was only the road ahead, the next corner, the next stretch, and the immediate present. When the 3-week rental period ended and the motorcycle had to be returned, Schoenmaker felt genuine sadness at handing it back. That sadness was informative. It indicated something about where energy and attention were best directed. A question formed: why not buy a motorcycle in India and ride towards Southeast Asia? The question sounds simple. The decision it represented was profound. Buying a motorcycle in India and riding towards Southeast Asia was not a holiday plan. It was a commitment to a direction of life rather than a fixed destination. It was a choice to trade the remaining security of a return ticket and a conventional future for a daily encounter with uncertainty on 2 wheels. Schoenmaker purchased a Royal Enfield Classic 350 and named the bike Dhano, a name that carried affection and the implicit acknowledgement that the motorcycle was now a companion rather than a tool. That naming practice, which continued with every subsequent bike, reflected something important about the philosophy Schoenmaker was building on the road. Dhano began carrying Schoenmaker across India and eventually towards Southeast Asia. A camera recorded what the road looked like. The footage was honest. The problems that appeared stayed in the video rather than being removed in editing. The fear, the fatigue, and the mechanical failures were shown alongside the beautiful passes and the unexpected kindnesses from strangers. Building Itchy Boots against all prediction. The Itchy Boots YouTube channel grew because the content was real. And the content was real because Schoenmaker had no reason to make it otherwise. Many travel creators begin with an audience goal. They research what performs well, study thumbnail trends, adapt their content to algorithms, and build a channel as a deliberate media project. Schoenmaker began by documenting a journey that was happening regardless of whether anyone watched. The name Itchy Boots referred to the restlessness that keeps a traveler moving, the inability to stay in one place when the next road is already calling. The name was accurate and personal, and required no explanation to anyone who had ever felt it. How did a channel, with no studio, no team, and no established audience, reach 300,000 subscribers within 1 year of serious operation? Schoenmaker later pointed to consistency and quality as the primary factors, but the more accurate answer is trust. Audiences responded to Itchy Boots because nothing in the content felt manufactured. When the road was beautiful, the camera showed a beautiful road. When the bike broke down in a remote location with no visible help nearby, the camera showed that too. When Schoenmaker was tired or frustrated or uncertain about the next decision, those states were visible rather than edited away. The editing was done entirely by Schoenmaker, alone on a laptop, often in small guest houses and roadside stops between long riding days. Schoenmaker acknowledged that this process was consuming, that it required choosing work over rest and social connection in ways that felt isolating. The dedication produced results. 600 episodes across 5 years of continuous travel represented an output level that most content teams struggle to achieve with multiple people. Schoenmaker was simultaneously the writer, the navigator, the cinematographer, the interviewer, and the editor. Each of those roles carries a full professional workload on its own. The subscriber count climbed past 1 million, then past 2 million. Total views across the channel surpassed 618 million. These are numbers that advertising agencies and brand partnerships take seriously, and the commercial structure around the channel eventually reflected that. The bikes, the breakdowns, and the borders that pushed back. 60 countries across 5 years on a motorcycle is not a collection of highlights strung together for a camera. It is an accumulation of mechanical problems, border confrontations, navigation failures, near misses, weather emergencies, and logistical crises that have to be solved in real time, alone, often in places where the language barrier adds an additional layer of difficulty to every interaction. Schoenmaker's bikes became characters in the journey as much as any human being encountered along the way. Dhano, the Royal Enfield Classic 350, carried Schoenmaker through India and Southeast Asia before being shipped to South America for the next season of travel. In Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, Dhano covered ground that tested both the machine and the rider across altitude and terrain that Royal Enfield engineers in India had likely not specifically designed for. A Honda CRF 300 Rally, later named Alaska, became the primary motorcycle for the Africa chapters of the journey. The African seasons brought a different quality of challenge. Roads that appeared on maps sometimes did not exist in the expected form on the ground. Community interactions were more complex. The political landscape of certain regions added variables that no route planning application could account for. Mechanical problems appeared across every season: severed wiring, broken components, sudden failures in locations where the nearest qualified mechanic was hundreds of kilometers away. Each breakdown required the kind of improvised problem-solving that cannot be learned from a manual, but only from repeated exposure to the specific situation of being stranded and needing to find a way forward. Border crossings introduced bureaucratic friction that sometimes took days to resolve. Paperwork that was correct in one country became a problem at the next border. Transit documents that officials in one town had approved were rejected by a different official in the same country the following week. The U.S. book tour cancellation illustrated how borders could stop even the most established traveler. Schoenmaker, who had crossed into countries including Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan without significant incident, determined that traveling to the United States posed unacceptable risk, given the immigration climate at that time. The creator, who had been welcomed by communities across some of the most geopolitically complex regions on Earth, found American immigration more intimidating than all of them. That decision disappointed many American fans who had planned to attend the tour events. It also demonstrated a pragmatic risk assessment operating beneath the adventurous surface of the Itchy Boots brand. What that situation revealed was something that consistent long-distance travelers understand better than most people. The ability to assess real versus perceived risk is a skill built from direct experience in multiple environments. Schoenmaker had crossed into Iran alone on a motorcycle, ridden through Pakistan, navigated the political complexity of multiple West African nations, and managed border procedures across dozens of countries with varying degrees of hostility to outside travelers. The conclusion that the United States presented an unacceptable immigration risk at that particular moment was not anxiety. It was the judgment of someone who had spent years developing an accurate internal map of which risks were manageable and which were not. That judgment, applied consistently, was a large part of why Schoenmaker had successfully completed thousands of kilometers of genuinely difficult travel without being stopped permanently. The video that got 2 officers fired. In October 2023, Noraly Schoenmaker was riding through Oyo State in Nigeria, heading toward Abuja on the Monia-Isayan Road, when the motorcycle was stopped at a checkpoint. What happened at that checkpoint was not unusual in the broader context of road travel through parts of West Africa, where travelers and locals alike have long documented the practice of police officers demanding informal payments at roadside stops. What was unusual was that Schoenmaker had a camera running. 2 special police constables, Karim Fatai and Jimo Lukman, intercepted Schoenmaker and openly demanded a financial payment. The demand was not subtle or disguised. It was direct. In all the countries Schoenmaker had traveled across by that point, which numbered more than 40, nothing comparable had occurred. The experience was documented on camera exactly as it happened. The video was uploaded as part of the Africa series on Itchy Boots. What followed was not anticipated and went well beyond the Itchy Boots audience. The video went viral in Nigeria. Media outlets covered the incident. Reactions came from citizens, journalists, and officials. The Nigerian police in Oyo State launched an investigation. Within weeks, the Oyo State Police Commissioner announced that both officers had been dismissed from service following an orderly room investigation. Both were stripped of their uniforms in a formal proceeding. A Dutch motorcycle traveler documenting a personal journey across Africa had produced a piece of video evidence that contributed directly to the dismissal of 2 police officers and became part of a larger national conversation about corruption within the Nigerian police force. That outcome was never planned. Schoenmaker had not set out to conduct investigative journalism or to hold law enforcement accountable. The camera was running because it was always running. That consistency of documentation, which began as a creative habit on Indian roads in 2018, had by 2023 become a form of accountability that neither the creator nor the audience had anticipated. The Nigerian video illustrates something that many discussions about Itchy Boots often overlook. The channel is not just entertainment. It is a form of honest documentation of real-world travel, carried out by a lone rider without a support team or institutional backing. Because of that, it sometimes captures moments that extend far beyond online storytelling and have real-life consequences. One such instance reportedly led to 2 men losing their positions in law enforcement after a routine checkpoint encounter was recorded by a Dutch geologist-turned-motorcycle traveler who chose to keep her camera running, turning an ordinary stop into an incident with lasting impact. He crash that ended the Africa season. In the spring of 2024, Noraly Schoenmaker was traveling through Tanzania on the Honda CRF 300 Rally named Alaska, working through what would have been one of the most spectacular legs of the Africa journey. The destination ahead was Kilimanjaro. The road being traveled passed through the Mbeya region, an area of southern Tanzania where unpaved roads and rough terrain are normal rather than exceptional. Schoenmaker had ridden far more technically demanding roads than this across multiple seasons. The Africa journey had already covered North Africa, West Africa, and the journey down the continent's eastern corridor. Then a rut that looked manageable from a moving motorcycle proved otherwise. Schoenmaker went down hard on a road that, reviewed afterwards, did not look like the kind of surface that should have produced such serious consequences. The collarbone broke. The foot sustained an injury. Alaska, the motorcycle, was too heavy for Schoenmaker to lift alone in the immediate aftermath of the crash. More than 30 minutes passed before any vehicle appeared on the road. A passing truck stopped and provided assistance. Local people helped transport Schoenmaker to medical care. A Tanzanian hospital confirmed the collarbone fracture and assessed the other injuries. The decision that followed required clear thinking under significant pain. Tanzania had hospitals. Tanzania had doctors. But the surgery required for a serious collarbone separation, the kind where bone fragments need to be repositioned and secured, was best performed at home in the Netherlands, where the follow-up care would also be accessible. Schoenmaker arranged to fly home. Alaska was shipped back separately. The Africa journey, which had been progressing toward East Africa and the iconic peaks of the continent, was over. The episode that documented the crash was filmed through visible pain. Schoenmaker kept the camera recording as the situation unfolded, describing what had happened in the measured tone that had become the consistent voice of Itchy Boots across hundreds of episodes. No dramatic performance, no performed stoicism, just honest documentation of a serious accident and the immediate decisions it required. That composure in the face of a significant injury struck observers as consistent with the broader philosophy of the channel. Things happen. The camera records. The person in front of the camera keeps moving forward as best the situation allows. The crash did not feel like the end of the journey. It felt like the beginning of one of the hardest chapters within it. What happened after the flight home was harder than the crash itself. Surgery, a collapsed lung, and the recovery. The surgery to repair the broken collarbone in the Netherlands appeared initially to go as planned. What the surgical team encountered once the procedure began was more complex than the imaging had suggested. Bone fragments had migrated in the period between the crash and the surgery, creating additional complications that required extended work during the procedure. The collarbone was stabilized with the hardware required for that type of repair. Then, during or immediately following surgery, a bone fragment punctured the lung. A collapsed lung, in medical terms a pneumothorax, creates a situation where air leaks into the space between the lung and the chest wall, preventing normal expansion. The lung collapses partially or fully, depending on the severity. Breathing becomes painful and shallow. Every movement of the chest that should be automatic requires effort. This complication had not been caused by the motorcycle crash. It arrived as a consequence of the treatment for the crash, which created a specific kind of frustration that Schoenmaker acknowledged while remaining visibly controlled in the recovery update video posted to the channel. The lung collapse required additional intervention and extended the recovery timeline significantly. Rehabilitation after the combined injuries demanded attention to both the structural repair of the collarbone and the restoration of lung function. The cardiovascular capacity that a long-distance motorcycle rider depends on for sustained focus across hours of riding was compromised. The shoulder and chest mobility required to handle a loaded motorcycle over rough terrain had to be rebuilt carefully to avoid re-injury during the healing process. Physical therapists work with collarbone and lung injuries with specific caution. The clavicle stabilizes the shoulder girdle, which connects to the arms, which are the primary steering and control mechanism for a motorcycle. Rebuilding that chain of movement correctly requires patience that does not shorten because the person wants to be back on a bike. Schoenmaker used the recovery period productively. The book that had been planned for some time was worked on during the months away from the road. A Dutch-language edition was announced for near-term publication. The channel continued during recovery with content from previous footage and updated videos that gave the audience transparent information about the healing process. How long does recovery from this combination of injuries take? Medical specialists note that collarbone hardware repairs typically require 12 to 16 weeks for bone healing. with full functional return to demanding physical activities taking considerably longer when lung complications are included. The recovery raised a question that the channel's history answered before anyone had to ask it out loud. The one-person media empire. Nobody fully described. Most coverage of Noraly Schoenmaker focuses on the destinations and the incidents: the theft in Iraq, the crash in Tanzania, the Nigerian police video, and the accumulated kilometers across 5+ years of travel. What that coverage consistently underestimates is the operational achievement sitting behind all of it. Schoenmaker built and maintained a one-person global media operation that produced more than 600 individual episodes across 5 years of near-continuous travel. Consider what that production volume requires. Each episode involves filming across an entire day of riding, often in conditions where the primary cognitive demand is navigation and road safety. After the riding day ends, the footage has to be reviewed, selected, sequenced, and edited into a coherent narrative episode on a laptop in whatever accommodation has been secured for the night. The episode is then uploaded on a publishing schedule that maintains consistent output to a global audience expecting regular content. Every single one of those functions was performed by one person across 5 years, 60+ countries, and more than 160,000 kilometers. No production company manages the channel. No team splits the filming and editing responsibilities. No talent manager handles brand communications or sponsorship negotiations. The audience of 2.8 million subscribers was built and maintained by a single Dutch geologist turned creator, working alone with equipment that fit on a motorcycle. How does that compare to other travel creators operating at similar subscriber scales? Most channels with audiences in the millions operate with teams, sometimes large ones, where filming, editing, social media management, and business development are divided between multiple people. The solo operation model at the scale Itchy Boots achieved is genuinely rare. Schoenmaker also maintained a level of creative consistency that audience retention data reflects. The approach to storytelling remained recognizably the same from the first India episodes to the Africa seasons years later. The tone stayed curious rather than sensational. The community built around the channel reflected those values, with viewers routinely describing the Itchy Boots audience as notably respectful and engaged compared to many travel channels of similar size. The Nigerian video additionally demonstrated that the channel had moved beyond entertainment into something closer to citizen journalism at specific moments. The public accountability outcome of that single episode, 2 officers dismissed through a formal investigation process that was triggered at least partly by the viral spread of the video, represented an impact that no travel vlogger in 2018 buying a motorcycle in India could have anticipated as a possible consequence of keeping the camera running. Where the journey stands now. After recovering from the Tanzania crash and the surgical complications, Noraly Schoenmaker faced the decisions that follow any serious disruption to a long-term project. Alaska, the Honda CRF 300 Rally that had carried the Africa season, was retired after sustaining significant wear across its operational life, in addition to the damage from the crash. Schoenmaker began searching for a replacement machine with specific requirements. The adventure motorcycle market in 2024 had trended toward heavier, more feature-loaded bikes. Schoenmaker's requirements ran in the opposite direction, toward a machine that was capable, durable, and light enough for the solo rider to manage in the conditions that Africa and other technically demanding regions present. The search for the right next bike was itself documented. The channel continued in a lower output mode during recovery, maintaining connection with the audience through updates, equipment reviews, and reflections on the Africa journey. The book project moved forward during this period. Schoenmaker noted that a Dutch-language edition would be published first, with an English version planned for a later stage. What does the Itchy Boots story represent when examined across its complete arc from 2018 to the present? Observers who have followed the channel since the beginning describe a rare combination of qualities that explain the sustained audience loyalty. Technical riding skill at a level that commands respect in the motorcycle community. Honest emotional expression at a level that creates a genuine connection with viewers. Operational consistency at a level that demonstrates a work ethic beyond what the adventure travel genre usually requires from its creators. The journey that started because a life in the Netherlands fell apart in a moment of betrayal became, across 7+ years, one of the most sustained individual documentary projects in YouTube history. Schoenmaker did not set out to inspire millions of people. The original goal was to survive a personal collapse and find a direction that did not require going backwards into what had been lost. That direction turned out to run through India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Central Asia, South America, North America, and the length of Africa. The next road is already being selected. The camera will keep running. The journey that started in pain and uncertainty has produced something that money and planning alone could never have manufactured. An audience of millions that trusts the person behind the camera because everything that camera has shown them has been real. Noraly Schoenmaker turned the worst year of her life into the beginning of one of the most remarkable solo journeys ever documented on film. The betrayal, the fear, the broken bones, the collapsed lung, the stolen motorcycle, the dismissed police officers, all of it became part of a story still being written. Like this video and subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headline and find the real person underneath it. The next one is already waiting.